Stephen Warren's heart raced as the medical scanner hummed, revealing his anatomy to the alien scientist. He knew his unusual physiology would shock them, but he wasn't prepared for the gasps and murmurs that filled the sterile examination room. The Tarkalian homeworld's atmosphere felt heavy, its gravity slightly stronger than Earth's. Stephen had volunteered for this interspecies breeding program out of a sense of duty and curiosity. The Tarkalians, an advanced alien race, faced extinction due to a severe genetic bottleneck and fertility crisis. Their last hope lay in human DNA. Cleo, the lead Tarkalian scientist, stared at the holographic display with a mixture of revulsion and fascination. Her large almond-shaped eyes widened as she processed the data. Stephen's reproductive organs were significantly larger than those of Tarkalian males. "Is everything all right?" Stephen asked, breaking the tense silence. Cleo's skin, a pale blue with iridescent patches, seemed to shimmer as she composed herself. "Yes, Mr. Warren, your anatomy is unexpected." News of Stephen's unique physiology spread quickly. Other Tarkalian scientists and officials crowded into the room, their reactions ranging from disgust to intrigue. Stephen felt like a specimen under a microscope, acutely aware of the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The clinical atmosphere of the facility contrasted sharply with Stephen's attempts at friendly conversation. He cracked a joke about rising to the occasion, but it fell flat among the serious Tarkalians. Heated debates broke out among the alien observers. Some saw human DNA as the key to saving their species, while others feared it would taint their genetic purity. Stephen caught fragments of their arguments, his translators struggling to keep up with their rapid-fire language. "We can't allow this abomination," one official hissed. "But what choice do we have?" another countered. "Our population is dwindling. We need new genetic material." Stephen cleared his throat. "Excuse me, Dr. Cleo. Could we speak privately about the specifics of the breeding program?" Cleo nodded, her professional demeanor barely masking her inner turmoil. As they left the examination room, Stephen overheard a whispered conversation that sent a chill down his spine. "The purists won't stand for this. They'll sabotage the program before they let humans breed with our kind." Stephen and Cleo entered a secure conference room, the door sealing with a soft hiss behind them. The weight of two species' futures hung in the air between them. Stephen took a deep breath, preparing to navigate the complex waters of interspecies diplomacy and potential intimacy. Cleo's gaze lingered on Stephen's midsection before meeting his eyes. "Mr. Warren, I believe we have much to discuss regarding your participation in our program." Stephen nodded, acutely aware that the success or failure of this conversation could determine the fate of an entire alien race, and possibly the future of human Tarkalian relations. He steeled himself for what promised to be the most important and awkward discussion of his life. "Mr. Warren, I believe we have much to discuss regarding your participation in our program." Stephen nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "Of course, Dr. Cleo. Where should we begin?" For the next hour, they delved into the intricacies of the breeding program. Cleo's initial discomfort gradually gave way to scientific curiosity as she explained the genetic challenges facing her species. Stephen listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that impressed the Tarkalian scientist. As their discussion concluded, Cleo's large eyes fixed on Stephen with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "Mr. Warren, if you're still willing, we'd like to proceed with a series of compatibility tests." "I'm ready," Stephen replied, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. The following days blurred into a whirlwind of examinations and simulations. Stephen found himself in various states of undress, surrounded by beeping machines and holographic displays. Cleo's touch, though clinical, sent unexpected shivers through his body. During one particularly intimate test, Stephen noticed Cleo's skin shimmer more intensely than usual. Her breathing quickened as she attached sensors to his chest. Their eyes met, and for a moment the clinical atmosphere dissolved into something more charged. Cleo cleared her throat, breaking the tension. "Your physiological responses are quite strong, Mr. Warren." Stephen managed a nervous chuckle. "Please call me Stephen, and yes, I've noticed some unexpected reactions myself." As the days passed, Stephen and Cleo found themselves spending more time together outside the lab. They shared meals in the facility's cafeteria, discussing everything from Earth's ecosystems to Tarkalian poetry. Stephen was captivated by Cleo's brilliant mind and dedication to her work, while Cleo found herself drawn to Stephen's adaptability and quick wit. Their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed. Dr. Zorn, a male Tarkalian scientist with a perpetual scowl, watched their interactions with narrowed eyes. One day, as Stephen passed by Zorn's lab, he overheard a heated conversation. "Cleo's objectivity is compromised," Zorn hissed to a colleague. "She's too close to the human subject. It's unnatural." Stephen's stomach churned at the venom in Zorn's voice. He hurried away, his mind racing. The next day, he confided in Cleo about what he'd heard. Cleo's skin paled to a lighter blue. "Zorn has always opposed the program, but I didn't think he'd stoop to personal attacks." She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Perhaps he's right. I have become emotionally invested in our work together." Stephen reached out, hesitating before gently placing his hand on her arm. "That's not a bad thing, Cleo. It shows how much you care about saving your species." Their moment was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. They stepped out to find a crowd gathered around a large screen where a charismatic Tarkalian was giving a speech. "Wana cannot allow our genetic purity to be tainted by alien DNA," the speaker declared, his voice booming through the facility. "That's Vex," Cleo whispered to Stephen, "a politician who's been rallying against the breeding program." As they listened, Stephen realized the depth of the divide within Tarkalian society. The fate of the entire program, and possibly both their species, hung in the balance. Cleo turned to Stephen, her eyes blazing with willpower. "We need to intensify our efforts. I propose we move to the next phase of testing." The next morning, Stephen found himself in a private room with Cleo, preparing to provide a genetic sample. The air felt thick with anticipation and something else, an electric current of attraction neither of them could deny. As Cleo explained the procedure, her usual professional demeanor slipped. Her hand trembled slightly as she handed Stephen the collection device. Their fingers brushed, sending a jolt through both of them. "I'll give you privacy," Cleo said, her voice husky. She turned to leave but hesitated at the door. For a moment, Stephen thought she might say something more, but she simply nodded and stepped out. Left alone, Stephen took a deep breath and focused on the task at hand. When it was done, he called Cleo back in. As she took the sample, their eyes met. The air crackled with unspoken tension. "Thank you, Stephen," Cleo said softly. This could change everything." News of the successful sample collection spread quickly through the facility. Stephen noticed more curious and some hostile glances directed his way. Dr. Zorn's campaign against the program intensified, with whispers of impropriety between the human subject and lead scientist. Cleo tried to maintain her professional facade, but Stephen could see the toll it was taking on her. One evening, he found her alone in the lab, staring at a holographic display of his DNA intertwined with Tarkalian genetic markers. "Cleo?" he said gently. She turned, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Stephen, I don't know if I can do this. The opposition is growing stronger, and these feelings I'm having, they're clouding my judgment." Before Stephen could respond, an announcement blared through the facility's communication system. "Attention all personnel. A public debate on the human breeding program has been scheduled. Dr. Cleo will represent the scientific community, and the human subject, Stephen Warren, will speak on behalf of Earth's cooperation. Prepare your statements accordingly." Stephen and Cleo looked at each other, the weight of what was to come settling over them. They had been thrust into the spotlight, their professional and personal lives now irrevocably intertwined. As they began to prepare for the debate, Stephen couldn't help but wonder, could they convince a skeptical Tarkalian public to accept human help? And what would become of the unexpected connection growing between them? The answers to these questions would have to wait. For now, they had a debate to win and two species' futures to secure. As Stephen and Cleo left the conference room, the facility buzzed with activity. Scientists rushed through corridors, debating the implications of the upcoming public forum. The air crackled with tension, a palpable reminder of the high stakes they faced. "Are you ready for this?" Cleo asked, her skin shimmering with nervous energy. Stephen nodded, his teeth clenched. As ready as I'll ever be. Let's hope we can change some minds. They made their way to the debate hall, a cavernous space filled with tiered seating. As they entered, a hush fell over the crowd. Hundreds of Tarkalian eyes turned to stare at the human and his alien colleague. Stephen felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back as he took in the sea of blue faces, many twisted with suspicion or outright hostility. Cleo led him to the stage, where they took their positions behind sleek podiums. Across from them stood their opponents, Dr. Zorn, his perpetual scowl deeper than ever, and the charismatic politician Vex, whose piercing gaze seemed to bore into Stephen's soul. A Tarkalian moderator stepped forward, her voice amplified throughout the hall. We gather today to debate the future of our species. The question before us, should we proceed with the human breeding program? Vex wasted no time in launching his attack. His voice boomed across the hall, filled with passion and conviction. My fellow Tarkalians, we stand at a crossroads. On one path lies the purity of our genetic heritage, carefully cultivated over millennia. On the other, a descent into mongrelization, our very essence diluted by alien blood. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Stephen gripped the edges of his podium, forcing himself to remain calm as Vex continued his tirade. Dr. Zorn took over, his clinical tone a stark contrast to Vex's fiery rhetoric. Our preliminary studies indicate significant physiological incompatibilities between humans and Tarkalians. The risks of genetic instability and unforeseen mutations are simply too great. As Zorn presented his data, Stephen noticed Cleo's skin paling to a lighter shade of blue. He leaned closer, whispering, "Don't let them rattle you. We've got this." Cleo nodded, taking a deep breath before stepping forward to present their case. Her voice, though softer than Vex's, carried a quiet authority that commanded attention. Esteemed colleagues, honored citizens, she began, the facts are irrefutable. Our population is dwindling. Each generation, fewer Tarkalian children are born. Without an infusion of new genetic material, we face extinction within centuries. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. Then with a gesture, she brought up a holographic display showing the intertwining of human and Tarkalian DNA. Our research indicates that human genetic diversity could be the key to our survival. By carefully integrating specific human traits, we can revitalize our gene pool without compromising our essential Tarkalian characteristics. As Cleo delved into the technical details of their findings, Stephen surveyed the audience. He noticed a shift in the atmosphere, skepticism giving way to curiosity, especially among the younger Tarkalians. When it was his turn to speak, Stephen decided to take a more personal approach. I stand before you not just as a potential donor, but as a representative of humanity. Throughout our history, we've faced challenges similar to yours. Time and again, genetic diversity has been our salvation, allowing us to adapt and thrive in the face of adversity. He shared stories of human populations overcoming genetic bottlenecks, of hybrid vigor producing stronger offspring. As he spoke, he noticed several female Tarkalians leaning forward, their large eyes fixed on him with unmistakable interest. An idea struck him. It was risky, potentially embarrassing, but it might just turn the tide. I propose a demonstration, Stephen announced. Right here, right now, I volunteer to undergo a public medical examination. Let your own doctors compare my physiology to yours in real time. The hall erupted in a cacophony of voices. The debate organizers huddled together, arguing in rapid-fire Tarkalian. Finally, they agreed to Stephen's proposal. A team of Tarkalian medical professionals, including a visibly reluctant Dr. Zorn, approached the stage. Stephen removed his shirt, feeling exposed under the scrutiny of hundreds of alien eyes. As the examination began, holographic displays flickered to life, showing detailed scans of Stephen's anatomy alongside Tarkalian comparisons. The audience watched in fascination as the similarities and differences were revealed. Gasps and murmurs filled the hall when the scans showed unexpected compatibilities between human and Tarkalian reproductive systems. Impossible, Dr. Zorn muttered, his fingers flying over a control panel. There must be some mistake. But other Tarkalian scientists in the audience were already confirming the results. The compatibility is undeniable, one called out. These findings are revolutionary. The examination took an unexpected turn when sensors detected Stephen's pheromone output. The holographic displays showed the effect on Tarkalian female physiology, elevated heart rates, hormonal surges, and clear signs of arousal. Stephen felt his cheeks burn as he noticed the reactions in the audience. Several female Tarkalians were visibly affected, their skin shimmering with intensity, eyes dilated and fixed on him. Seizing the moment, Cleo stepped forward. In light of these findings, I propose a series of controlled breeding experiments with willing Tarkalian volunteers. Participation would be entirely voluntary and subject to the strictest ethical guidelines. To Stephen's amazement, hands immediately shot up across the audience. Female Tarkalians stood, volunteering themselves for the program. The hall buzzed with excitement and controversy. As the debate concluded, the Tarkalian Governing Council announced their decision. We will proceed with a limited trial of the human breeding program, the head counselor declared. However, it will be subject to constant monitoring and may be terminated at any sign of danger to our society. Stephen and Cleo exchanged relieved glances as the crowd began to disperse. Their victory, however narrow, felt monumental. As they made their way off the stage, they found themselves surrounded by curious Tarkalians, many of them female. Mr. Warren, one asked, her skin shimmering, how soon can we begin the breeding trials? Stephen stammered, overwhelmed by the attention. He looked to Cleo for support, only to see a flash of something in her eyes. Was it jealousy? Cleo stepped forward, her voice firm. As the lead scientist, I will personally oversee Mr. Warren's participation in the breeding program. All volunteers will be thoroughly screened and selected based on genetic compatibility. As they left the debate hall, followed by a mix of supportive and hostile Tarkalians, Stephen felt the weight of what they'd set in motion. He and Cleo walked in silence towards the research facility, both acutely aware that their relationship, professional and personal, had entered uncharted territory. The future of two species now rested on their shoulders, complicated by the unexpected surge of Tarkalian interest in Stephen and the undeniable tension growing between him and Cleo. As they reached the facility's entrance, Stephen took a deep breath, bracing himself for whatever challenges lay ahead. Stepping through the entrance, they were immediately surrounded by a flurry of activity. Dr. Cleo, Mr. Warren, a Tarkalian scientist called out, hurrying towards them. The High Council has assigned a team to assist with the program. They're waiting in the main laboratory. Cleo nodded, her professional demeanor sliding back into place. Thank you. We'll be there shortly. As they made their way through the bustling corridors, Stephen couldn't help but notice the mix of excitement and apprehension on the faces of the Tarkalian staff. The successful debate had clearly energized the facility, but an undercurrent of tension remained. Entering the main laboratory, they were greeted by a diverse group of Tarkalian scientists and medical professionals. To Stephen's surprise, Dr. Zorn stood among them, his face set in a barely concealed scowl. A tall, elegant Tarkalian woman stepped forward. I am Dr. Lyra, she introduced herself, her large eyes fixed on Stephen with undisguised curiosity. I'll be assisting with the compatibility tests. As the team began discussing the first phase of the program, Stephen found his attention drawn to the sophisticated equipment surrounding them. Sleek monitors displayed complex biological data, while a large chamber in the center of the room hummed with energy. We'll start with basic physiological scans, Cleo explained, gesturing towards the chamber. Stephen, if you could step inside. As he entered the chamber, Stephen felt a slight tingle across his skin. Through the transparent walls, he watched as the Tarkalian scientists crowded around the monitors, their expressions a mix of fascination and skepticism. Dr. Zorn's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. I still maintain that this is a foolish endeavor. The risks far outweigh any potential benefits. Cleo's skin darkened slightly, a sign of irritation Stephen had come to recognize. Your concerns are noted, Dr. Zorn. However, the Council has made their decision. We will proceed with caution and transparency. As the test progressed, Stephen underwent a battery of examinations. Blood samples were taken, brain activity monitored, and various stimuli introduced to gauge his responses. Throughout it all, he couldn't help but notice Dr. Lyra's intense focus on him, her skin shimmering with an iridescent quality he hadn't seen before. Hours passed, and fatigue began to set in. As Stephen emerged from another round of tests, he caught Cleo's eye. She looked exhausted, the strain of maintaining her composure evident in the tight set of her shoulders. "I think that's enough for today," Cleo announced, her voice firm. "We'll resume tomorrow with the interactive tests." As the team began to disperse, Dr. Lyra approached Stephen. "I must say, Mr. Warren, your physiology is fascinating. I look forward to our continued work together." Stephen nodded, acutely aware of Cleo watching their interaction. "Thank you, Dr. Lyra. It's been an interesting day." Later that evening, as Stephen prepared to retire to his quarters, he found Cleo waiting for him in the corridor. "Stephen," she said softly, her skin pulsing with a soft blue light. I wanted to check on you. How are you holding up?" He smiled, touched by her concern. "I'm fine, Cleo. Just a bit overwhelmed by it all." She nodded, hesitating for a moment before speaking again. "I noticed Dr. Lyra seemed quite interested in you." Stephen felt a flutter of something in his chest. Was Cleo jealous? "She's just curious about human physiology," he assured her. "Like all of you." Cleo's skin darkened slightly. "Of course. Well, get some rest. Tomorrow will be more intensive." As she turned to leave, Stephen reached out, his hand hovering just above her arm. "Cleo, wait. I want you to know that no matter what happens with this program, you're special to me." Her eyes widened, a shimmer passing across her skin. For a moment, Stephen thought she might say something more, but she simply nodded and hurried away. The next morning, Stephen entered the laboratory to find it abuzz with activity. Dr. Lyra greeted him warmly, leading him to a partitioned area where several female Tarkalians waited. "Today we'll be testing your physiological responses to direct Tarkalian interaction," Dr. Lyra explained, her skin shimmering with excitement. As the test began, Stephen found himself in close proximity to various Tarkalian females, their alien beauty both familiar and exotic. Sensors monitored his vital signs as they engaged in controlled interactions, conversations, light physical contact, and exposure to Tarkalian pheromones. Throughout it all, Stephen was acutely aware of Cleo's presence. She moved efficiently around the lab, overseeing the proceedings with a mask of professional detachment. But he caught the occasional flicker of emotion in her eyes, a tension in her movements that betrayed her discomfort. As the day progressed, it became clear that Dr. Lyra's responses to Stephen were exceptionally strong. Her pheromone levels spiked dramatically in his presence, causing noticeable reactions in both of them. "Fascinating," Dr. Zorn muttered, studying the readouts with a furrowed brow. "It appears we have our first viable candidate for the breeding attempt." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Stephen's gaze met Cleo's across the room, a silent communication passing between them. The reality of what they were undertaking suddenly felt very immediate and very real. As the team began preparations for the first official breeding attempt, tensions in the facility rose. Security measures were increased, with guards posted at every entrance to ward off the growing crowd of protesters outside. On the morning of the procedure, Stephen found himself alone in a preparation room, his mind racing with the enormity of what was about to happen. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Cleo entered, her skin a pale, muted blue. "It's time, Stephen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you ready?" He nodded, searching her face for any sign of the emotion he'd glimpsed in recent days. "Cleo, But before he could finish, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, and the sound of running footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. "What's happening?" Stephen asked, his heart racing. Cleo's eyes widened in panic. "I don't know, but something's wrong. We need to—" Her words were cut off as the door burst open, revealing a security officer. "Dr. Cleo, Mr. Warren, you need to come quickly. There's been a sabotage attempt in the breeding chamber." As they rushed through the chaotic corridors, Stephen's mind whirled with possibilities. What had gone wrong? And more importantly, what did this mean for the future of the program? And his relationship with Cleo? Cleo. As they raced through the facility, alarms blaring and red lights flashing, Stephen's mind struggled to process the sudden chaos. They burst into the breeding chamber to find a scene of pandemonium. Thick, greenish gas filled the air, and several Tarkalian scientists lay unconscious on the floor. In the center of the room, Dr. Zorn stood by a shattered containment unit, a mask covering his face. "Stop this madness!" Cleo shouted, her skin pulsing with anger and fear. Dr. Zorn turned, his eyes wild. "I won't let you contaminate our species with human DNA." Stephen, acting on instinct, lunged forward and tackled Dr. Zorn. They grappled on the floor as Cleo rushed to activate the emergency ventilation system. The gas began to clear, revealing the full extent of the damage. Security officers flooded the room, restraining Dr. Zorn and assisting the affected scientists. As the situation came under control, Stephen helped Cleo tend to the injured, including Dr. Lyra, who had been knocked unconscious by the gas. Hours later, as the facility buzzed with activity from the cleanup and investigation, Stephen and Cleo found themselves summoned to an emergency session of the Tarkalian High Council. The Grand Council chamber was a far cry from the sterile research facility. Ornate carvings adorned the walls, and the air thrummed with tension as council members took their seats. Stephen and Cleo stood before them, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. "Dr. Cleo, Mr. Warren," the head counselor began, her voice grave. "We require your full account of the events that transpired." For the next hour, Stephen and Cello provided a detailed recounting of the sabotage attempt and their response. They described Dr. Zorn's actions, the chaos in the breeding chamber, and their efforts to mitigate the damage. As they spoke, Stephen noticed the council members' expressions shifting from skepticism to admiration. When Cleo described how she had risked her own safety to activate the ventilation system, several counselors nodded approvingly. After a brief deliberation, the head counselor addressed them again. "In light of your actions and the clear dedication you've shown to this project, we have decided not only to continue the human breeding program, but to expand it." She turned to Cleo. "Dr. Cleo, you will be granted full authority over its implementation." Cleo's skin shimmered with surprise and pride. "Thank you, counselor. I won't let you down." As they left the council chamber, Stephen and Cleo were introduced to Krell, a stern-faced Tarkalian security officer. "I've been assigned to lead the security overhaul of your facility," he stated, eyeing Stephen with barely concealed suspicion. Over the next few days, Krell and his team worked tirelessly to upgrade the facility's defenses. Stephen found himself working closely with the security officer, offering insights on human physiology that might be relevant to potential threats. "Your species is remarkably resilient," Krell grudgingly admitted one day as they reviewed the new security protocols. "Perhaps there's more to you than I initially thought." As news of the sabotage attempt spread, Stephen noticed a shift in the atmosphere outside the facility. The crowds of protesters dwindled, replaced by curious onlookers and even supporters. Tarkalian news broadcasts debated the incident, with many voices now speaking in favor of the breeding program. One morning, Cleo called Stephen into her office. Her skin pulsed with a mix of nervousness and drive. "Stephen, I've made a decision," she said, her large eyes fixed on him. "We're going to proceed with a second breeding attempt." Stephen nodded, feeling a flutter of anticipation. "That's great news. Is Dr. Lyra ready to participate?" Cleo's skin darkened slightly. "Actually, I've decided to volunteer myself as the Tarkalian participant." The words hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken emotions. Stephen felt his heart race, a mix of excitement and apprehension washing over him. "Cleo, are you sure?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "What about maintaining objectivity?" She moved closer, her skin shimmering. "This project is too important to leave to chance. I trust myself to see it through, no matter the outcome." As they began preparations for the second attempt, Stephen could feel the eyes of the entire research team on them. Whispers and meaningful glances followed them through the facility, but Cleo remained focused and professional. The night before the scheduled attempt, Stephen tossed and turned in his quarters, his mind racing. A soft knock at his door startled him. He opened it to find Lyra standing there, her skin pulsing with agitation. "Mr. Warren," she said, her voice tight, "I need to speak with you about tomorrow's procedure." Stephen invited her in, sensing the tension radiating from her. Lyra paced the small room, her movements jerky and agitated. "I don't believe Dr. Cleo should be the one to participate in this attempt," she blurted out. "My physiological response to you is stronger. I'm the more suitable candidate for ensuring the program's success." Stephen felt a wave of unease wash over him. "Dr. Lyra, I appreciate your dedication, but Cleo has made her decision." Lyra's eyes flashed. "This isn't about personal preference, Mr. Warren. It's about the future of our species. I intend to challenge her decision before the High Council." As she stormed out, Stephen sank onto his bed, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He knew that tomorrow would bring challenges he couldn't have imagined when he first set foot on this alien world. Outside his window, the Tarkalian night sky shimmered with unfamiliar constellations. Somewhere in the facility, Cleo was likely grappling with her own doubts and fears. And beyond the walls, unknown forces might still be plotting to derail their work. Stephen closed his eyes, trying to center himself. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, he knew that the fate of two species now rested in his hands. With that thought, he drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreams of shimmering skin and alien worlds dancing behind his eyelids. The soft chime of his alarm roused him from his troubled sleep. As he sat up, rubbing his eyes, the events of the previous night came rushing back. Stephen's heart raced as he recalled Dr. Lyra's visit and her threat to challenge Cleo's decision before the High Council. He quickly dressed and made his way to the main research wing, his mind churning with worry. As he entered the facility, he immediately sensed the heightened tension in the air. The corridors buzzed with hushed conversations and hurried footsteps. He spotted Cleo emerging from a conference room, her skin pulsing with a mix of stress and purpose. "Stephen," she said, her voice low and urgent, "we need to talk." She led him to a quiet corner, her large eyes darting around to ensure they weren't overheard. "The High Council has made a decision," she began, her skin shimmering with agitation. "They're allowing both Lyra and me to participate in separate breeding attempts." Stephen's eyes widened in surprise. "Both of you? But what about the concerns about objectivity?" Cleo's skin darkened slightly. "The Council believes this approach will increase our chances of success. But Stephen, there's more." She explained how Krell, the security chief, had uncovered evidence of a larger conspiracy within the Tarkalian scientific community. Anti-human extremists had infiltrated various departments, potentially compromising the entire breeding program. As if on cue, Krell appeared beside them, his stern face etched with concern. "Dr. Cleo, Mr. Warren," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're implementing new security measures immediately. You'll both be assigned personal bodyguards, and access to the breeding chamber will be restricted to essential personnel only." Stephen felt a chill run down his spine as the reality of the situation sank in. The facility was being put under lockdown, with all communication channels closely monitored. As they made their way to the medical wing for final preparations, Stephen noticed the increased security presence. Armed guards patrolled the corridors, and he could see new surveillance equipment being installed. In the medical bay, they found Dr. Lyra already undergoing pre-procedure examinations. Her skin pulsed with a mix of excitement and nervousness as she met Stephen's gaze. Cleo stiffened beside him, her professional mask slipping for just a moment to reveal a flash of distress. A newly appointed Tarkalian doctor named Vera approached them, datapad in hand. "We're ready to begin the selection process for the first attempt," she announced. Stephen's heart pounded as Vera activated a randomization program on her datapad. The tension in the room was palpable as they waited for the result. After what felt like an eternity, the screen flickered to life. "Dr. Lyra will be the first to attempt breeding with Stephen," Vera announced. Stephen felt Cleo stiffen beside him. He turned to her, seeing the scarcely controlled emotions play across her shimmering skin. In that moment, he knew he had to reassure her. "Cleo," he said softly, pulling her aside, "I want you to know that no matter what happens with these procedures, our connection is special. It goes beyond this program." Her large eyes met his, a glimmer of vulnerability shining through her professional demeanor. She nodded, her skin pulsing with a softer shade of blue. As Lyra was led away to begin final preparations, Krell approached them once more. "We've received intelligence suggesting the genetic purists are planning an attack on the facility," he said gravely. "We're enhancing our security measures, but I need you both to be on high alert." Stephen felt a surge of anxiety wash over him. The weight of what they were about to undertake suddenly felt enormous. Not only were they attempting to bridge the gap between two species, but they were doing so under the threat of violence from extremists. As he was escorted to the preparation room adjacent to the breeding chamber, Stephen's mind raced. He thought of Cleo, of the trust and connection they had built. He thought of Lyra and the responsibility he bore in this first attempt. And he thought of the future, not just his own, but that of two entire species. The door to the preparation room slid open, revealing the stark, clinical interior. As Stephen stepped inside, he knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The fate of the breeding program, the future of Tarkalian society, and his own heart, all hung in the balance. Behind him, the door sealed shut with a soft hiss, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the weight of history about to be made. The soft hiss of the door sealing behind him was quickly drowned out by the pounding of his heart. Stephen took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves as he surveyed the stark, clinical interior of the preparation room. He had barely begun to gather his thoughts when the door slid open again, revealing Cleo. Her skin pulsed with a mix of anticipation and nervousness as she stepped inside. "Stephen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the High Council has granted us a 48-hour window for this attempt. The pressure is immense." Before Stephen could respond, Dr. Vera entered, her datapad clutched tightly in her hand. "We must begin the final examinations immediately," she announced, her tone brisk and professional. As Vera conducted her tests, the tension in the room was palpable. Stephen watched as various instruments scanned his body, recording every minute detail of his physiology. Beside him, Cleo underwent similar examinations, her skin shimmering with each new reading. Suddenly, Vera's eyes widened as she examined the results on her datapad. "This is unexpected," she murmured, her fingers flying across the screen. "What is it?" Cleo asked, her skin darkening with concern. Vera looked up, her expression a mix of excitement and disbelief. "Dr. Cleo, your genetic makeup contains a unique protein. It's highly compatible with human DNA and could potentially prevent the severe allergic reaction we encountered in the previous attempt." The implications of this discovery hung in the air between them. Stephen felt a surge of hope, tempered by the weight of responsibility that came with it. "We need to adjust our protocol immediately," Vera continued, already making rapid changes to the breeding procedure on her datapad. "This could significantly increase our chances of success." As Vera worked, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. The door to the preparation room slid open, revealing Krell, his face etched with urgency. "The genetic purists have launched their attack," he announced, his voice tight with tension. "They've breached our outer defenses. We need to move quickly." Stephen's mind raced as he processed this new threat. He glanced at Cleo, seeing his own mix of fear and commitment reflected in her shimmering skin. Krell continued, his words coming in rapid succession. "We've implemented additional security measures, including a force field around the breeding chamber, but we can't guarantee how long we can hold them off." Vera looked up from her datapad, her expression grave. "The procedure must begin now if we're to have any chance of success within the 48-hour window." Stephen felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The fate of two species, the future of interstellar relations, all hanging in the balance. He looked at Cleo, seeing in her eyes the same tenacity he felt coursing through his veins. "We're ready," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. As they made their way to the breeding chamber, the sounds of conflict echoed through the facility. Shouts and the unmistakable sound of weapons fire filled the air. Stephen's heart raced as they approached the chamber door. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the corridor. Smoke billowed around them as debris rained down from the ceiling. Stephen instinctively pulled Cleo close, shielding her with his body. "We're cut off," Krell shouted, his weapon drawn as he scanned for threats. Stephen looked at Cleo, then at the breeding chamber door just meters away. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. "We have to do this ourselves," Cleo said, her skin pulsing with persistence. Stephen nodded, his eyes hardened. They made a dash for the chamber door, Krell providing cover fire against unseen assailants. As they sealed themselves inside the chamber, the chaos of the outside world faded away. The room hummed with advanced technology, atmospheric controls releasing a carefully calibrated mixture of pheromones and hormones. "Dr. Vera," Stephen called out, activating the communication system. "We're inside. Guide us through the procedure." Vera's voice crackled through the speakers, calm and professional despite the circumstances. "Initiating the breeding protocol now. Stephen, Cleo, prepare yourselves for intense physiological responses." As the pheromone mixture filled the air, Stephen felt a wave of sensation wash over him. His skin tingled, his senses heightened to an almost painful degree. Beside him, Cleo's skin shimmered and pulsed with colors he'd never seen before. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the scientific nature of their task melted away. There was only the connection between them, a bridge spanning the gulf between their species. Outside the chamber, the battle raged on. Krell and his security forces fought desperately to push back the genetic purist. Dr. Vera found herself face-to-face with Czar, the charismatic leader of the extremist group. "You're destroying the future of our species," Czar shouted, his followers nodding in agreement. Vera stood her ground, her voice steady as she responded. "No, we're saving it. Genetic diversity is the key to our survival. This program is our best hope for a future among the stars." As Vera's words resonated with some of the less radical members of Czar's group, inside the chamber, Stephen and Cleo reached a critical juncture in the breeding process. Their bodies moved in perfect synchronization, guided by instincts older than civilization itself. The monitoring devices surrounding them recorded unprecedented levels of genetic compatibility. Streams of data flowed across screens, documenting every aspect of the historic event unfolding within the chamber. As the procedure reached its climax, Stephen felt a surge of energy unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Cleo's skin glowed with an otherworldly light, her eyes locked with his in a moment of profound connection. In that instant, as their genetic material merged and mingled, the future of both their species hung in the balance. The fate of the breeding program, the security of the facility, and the course of Tarkalian-human relations all converged on this single pivotal moment. As the initial wave of sensation began to subside, Stephen and Cleo remained entwined, their bodies still humming with the aftereffects of the procedure. The chamber around them beeped and whirred, the monitoring devices working overtime to process the wealth of data they had just recorded. Outside, the sounds of conflict seemed to have diminished, but the tension in the air remained palpable. Stephen and Cleo exchanged a look of exhausted triumph, both aware that while their part might be done, the repercussions of what had just occurred were only beginning to unfold. Their bodies remained intertwined, still pulsing with the energy of their genetic exchange. Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the chamber. The sounds of conflict outside intensified, the muffled explosions and shouts growing louder. Stephen instinctively tightened his embrace around Cleo, his eyes darting to the sealed door. "The force field?" Cleo whispered, her skin flickering with concern. "It's holding." Stephen nodded, relief washing over him. Despite the chaos beyond their sanctuary, the protective barrier surrounding the chamber remained intact, shielding them from the turmoil outside. As they slowly disentangled themselves, both gasped at the unexpected sensations coursing through their bodies. Cleo's skin rippled with colors Stephen had never seen before, while he felt a tingling awareness spreading from his fingertips to his core. "Stephen," Cleo said, her voice filled with wonder, "something's happening. I feel different." Before he could respond, Dr. Vera's voice crackled through the chamber's communication system. "Remarkable," she exclaimed, her professional tone barely masking her excitement. "The protein in Cleo's genetic makeup is facilitating an unprecedented level of genetic exchange. We're seeing cellular integration beyond anything we anticipated." Stephen's mind reeled as he processed Vera's words. He looked at Cleo, seeing his own mix of awe and apprehension reflected in her shimmering eyes. Outside the chamber, the conflict reached its zenith. Krell's voice, strained but determined, came through the speakers. Czar and his core followers are cornered. We're making our final push. As Krell's team engaged in their decisive maneuver, Cleo and Steven experienced a cascade of physiological changes. Cleo's body temperature fluctuated rapidly, her skin alternating between cool blues and fiery reds. Steven blinked rapidly, his vision sharpening to an almost painful degree as his sensory organs underwent a rapid evolution. "Dr. Vera," Steven called out, his voice tight with a mixture of fascination and fear. "What's happening to us?" "Your bodies are adapting," Vera replied, her words coming in a rush as she analyzed the incoming data. "The genetic transfer has triggered latent traits in both your DNA structures. We're seeing temporary physiological adaptations we never thought possible." A series of alarms suddenly blared through the facility's communication system. Krell's voice, urgent and commanding, cut through the noise. "Czar's activated some kind of device. It's emitting a strange energy signature. All teams, converge on my position." Steven and Cleo exchanged alarmed glances, their bodies still undergoing rapid changes. They could only listen helplessly as Krell led his team through the facility's maintenance tunnels, racing against time to neutralize Czar's last-ditch effort. Moments that felt like hours passed, filled with the sounds of distant conflict and the hum of the chamber's monitoring equipment. Then abruptly, silence fell. "Threat neutralized," Krell's voice came through, breathless but triumphant. "The device has been disarmed. The facility is secure." As the immediate danger passed, Steven and Cleo's attention turned inward once more. The initial wave of changes seemed to be subsiding, but both could feel that something fundamental had shifted within them. "The procedure is complete," Dr. Vera announced. "We're disengaging the chamber locks now." The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a corridor filled with medical personnel and security teams. As Steven and Cleo stepped out, they were immediately surrounded by a flurry of activity. Dr. Vera approached, her eyes wide as she took in their appearance. "Fascinating," she murmured, running a handheld scanner over both of them. "The genetic integration is unlike anything we've ever seen. Cleo, your physical strength has increased significantly. And Steven, your brainwave patterns. They're operating on a level that aligns with our most advanced mathematical models." As the medical team ushered them towards the examination area, Steven caught sight of Krell overseeing the detention of Czar and his remaining followers. The genetic purist leader's face was a mask of defeat and disbelief as he watched Steven and Cleo pass by. In the medical bay, a battery of tests awaited them. Steven found himself processing complex Tarkalian equations with surprising ease, while Cleo demonstrated physical abilities far beyond her normal parameters. "The council has been informed," Dr. Vera said, her voice filled with awe-inspiring excitement. "They're sending their top geneticists to study the results. What we've achieved here today, it could change everything." As the gravity of their situation began to sink in, Steven looked at Cleo. Her skin pulsed with a mix of emotions: excitement, fear, and something deeper, more profound. He reached out, taking her hand in his, marveling at how natural it felt despite the changes they had both undergone. "What happens now?" Cleo asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Vera's expression turned serious. "Now, we monitor, we study, we try to understand the full implications of what's happened here. The genetic exchange between you two has unlocked possibilities we never imagined, but with those possibilities come unknowns, risks we can't yet quantify." As if to underscore her point, Steven suddenly felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. Beside him, Cleo's skin flickered rapidly through a spectrum of colors. "Get them to the high-security medical ward," Dr. Vera ordered, her voice sharp with concern. "We need to keep them under constant observation." As they were rushed through the facility's corridors, Steven caught glimpses of the aftermath of the genetic purist's attack. Repair crews worked to mend damaged systems, while security teams maintained a vigilant presence. In the distance, Steven could hear the distinctive sound of Tarkalian shuttles approaching. The High Council's delegation had arrived, ready to witness firsthand the results of their ambitious program. As the doors of the medical ward slid shut behind them, Steven and Cleo exchanged a look of shared apprehension and wonder. Their bodies continued to evolve in ways neither of them could have imagined, and the full consequences of their genetic mingling remained to be seen. The future of both their species now rested in their transformed bodies, a future filled with both incredible potential and unknown dangers. As the medical team swarmed around them, Stephen squeezed Cleo's hand, anchoring himself in their connection amidst the sea of uncertainty that stretched before them. The weight of their shared experience hung heavy in the air, a tangible reminder of the unprecedented journey they had embarked upon. As the medical team bustled around them, running tests and taking readings, Stephen felt a surge of dizziness wash over him once more. He gripped the edge of the examination table, his knuckles turning white as he fought to maintain his balance. Beside him, Cleo's skin pulsed with rapid color changes, a visual representation of the turmoil within her body. Dr. Vera's voice cut through the haze of activity surrounding them. "We need to stabilize their condition before proceeding with any further examinations," she ordered, her tone sharp with urgency. As the medical staff worked to address their immediate symptoms, Stephen's mind began to clear. He found himself processing the complex medical terminology being thrown around the room with surprising ease, understanding concepts that would have been beyond his comprehension mere hours ago. "Cleo," he whispered, turning to his partner, "are you experiencing this too? This heightened awareness?" Cleo nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. "It's like my senses are in overdrive," she replied, her voice barely audible. "I can hear conversations 3 rooms away, Stephen. I can smell the individual components of the sanitizing solution they're using." Their exchange was interrupted by the arrival of a group of high-ranking Tarkalian officials. The newcomers' eyes widened as they took in the sight of Stephen and Cleo, their appearances visibly altered by the genetic mingling. One of the officials, his robes marking him as a member of the High Council, stepped forward. "Dr. Vera, we need a full report on the situation. The Council is convening an emergency session to address the implications of this development." Dr. Vera nodded, her fingers flying over a data pad as she compiled her findings. "I'll present my initial report within the hour," she assured the official. "But I must stress that we are dealing with an evolving situation. The full extent of the genetic changes is still unfolding." As the official departed, Stephen overheard snippets of conversation from the corridor outside. Plans were already underway for the construction of a new facility, one dedicated to studying and monitoring their ongoing transformations. Hours passed in a blur of tests, examinations, and hushed conversations among the medical staff. Stephen found himself grappling with an influx of new knowledge, his mind racing to process the complex Tarkalian scientific concepts that now seemed as clear as basic arithmetic. Cleo, for her part, was undergoing a series of physical evaluations that left the Tarkalian scientists in awe. She lifted weights that would have challenged even the strongest Tarkalian males, her muscles rippling with newfound strength. As the day wore on, news of their successful breeding and subsequent transformation spread throughout the facility. Stephen could sense the shift in the atmosphere, the mixture of excitement and apprehension that permeated the air. It was late in the evening when Dr. Vera returned from her meeting with the High Council. Her expression was a mixture of excitement and concern as she approached Stephen and Cleo. "The Council has made its decision," she announced, her voice carrying a weight of significance. "They're establishing a new research center dedicated to studying your ongoing changes. It's to be called the Hybrid Integration Research Center." Stephen and Cleo exchanged glances, the implications of this decision sinking in. Their lives had been irrevocably altered, not just on a personal level, but on a scale that would impact both their species. "When will we be transferred?" Cleo asked, her skin shimmering with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. "Construction is already underway," Dr. Vera replied. "The facility should be ready within days. Until then, you'll remain here under constant observation." As if to underscore the necessity of this monitoring, Stephen suddenly felt a surge of mental activity. Complex equations and theorems flashed through his mind, each one unfolding with perfect clarity. Beside him, Cleo gasped, her body tensing as she experienced another spike in her physical capabilities. Dr. Vera immediately called for additional scans, her team scrambling to document these latest developments. As the medical staff swarmed around them once more, Stephen caught snippets of their conversations. Words like unprecedented, revolutionary, and game-changing floated through the air. In the midst of this whirlwind of activity, Stephen reached out and took Cleo's hand. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever changes lay ahead, whatever challenges they would face them together. As the night deepened, the facility around them continued to buzz with activity. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of construction as work on the new research center progressed at a frantic pace. The future that awaited them was uncertain, filled with both promise and peril. But one thing was clear: the world as they knew it had changed forever. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. As Stephen and Cleo's conditions stabilized, the facility around them transformed. The newly constructed Hybrid Integration Research Center, HIRC, rose from the ground with astonishing speed, a testament to the Tarkalians' advanced engineering capabilities. Dr. Vera entered their room, her face alight with excitement. "It's time," she announced. "The Earth delegation has arrived, and the High Council is ready to present you to the public." Stephen felt a flutter of nervousness in his stomach. He glanced at Cleo, who was adjusting her specially designed attire to accommodate her altered physique. Her skin rippled with a mix of blue and green, reflecting her own apprehension. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly. Cleo nodded, her eyes meeting his. "As ready as we'll ever be," she replied, her voice steady despite the tension visible in her posture. As they made their way through the corridors of the HIRC, they could hear the buzz of excitement from the gathered crowd. The doors to the main presentation hall slid open, revealing a sea of faces, Tarkalian and human alike. Gasps of amazement rippled through the audience as Stephen and Cleo stepped onto the stage. Stephen could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon them, studying their altered appearances with a mixture of awe and curiosity. Dr. Vera stepped forward, her voice ringing out clear and confident. "Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, I present to you the future of our species, the successful integration of human and Tarkalian genetics." She gestured towards Cleo, who stepped forward. "Observe as Cleo demonstrates her enhanced physical capabilities." A series of holographic obstacles materialized on the stage. Cleo moved with fluid grace, her body a blur of motion as she navigated the complex course. She leapt impossibly high, her muscles rippling with newfound strength as she effortlessly scaled vertical walls and vaulted over barriers. The audience watched in stunned silence, broken only by murmurs of astonishment and the occasional gasp of disbelief. Next, it was Stephen's turn. A holographic display flickered to life, presenting a series of complex Tarkalian mathematical equations. Stephen's mind raced, processing the information at an unprecedented speed. His hands flew over the interface, solving problems that would have stumped even the most brilliant Tarkalian mathematicians. As the demonstration concluded, Dr. Vera's voice took on a tone of reverence. "But perhaps the most groundbreaking development is this," she said, pausing for effect. "We've detected early signs of Tarkalian reproduction in Cleo." The announcement sent shockwaves through the audience. Tarkalian voices rose in excitement, many seeing this as the answer to their species' long-standing fertility crisis. As the presentation continued, Stephen noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Security Chief Krell and his team were on high alert, their eyes scanning the crowd intently. Suddenly, alarms blared through the hall. Krell's voice cut through the chaos. "Genetic contaminant detected, initiating lockdown procedures." Panic erupted as a small group of individuals scattered through the crowd. Stephen recognized the fanatical gleam in their eyes. Genetic purist sympathizers. Krell's team moved with practiced efficiency, but not before one of the saboteurs managed to release a pale mist into the air. Stephen felt a burning sensation in his lungs as he inhaled the engineered virus. The hall was plunged into chaos. Security personnel herded the delegates to safety, while medical teams converged on Stephen and Cleo. Through the haze of activity, Stephen could see Dr. Vera barking orders, her face a mask of willpower. As they were rushed to a quarantine chamber, Stephen felt an odd sensation coursing through his body. Instead of weakening him, the virus seemed to be triggering further changes in his physiology. Beside him, Cleo's skin flickered rapidly through a spectrum of colors. "Stephen," she gasped, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and wonder. Something's happening. In the isolation of the quarantine chamber, they watched in amazement as their bodies began to adapt to the virus. Far from causing harm, it seemed to be accelerating their genetic integration. Outside their sealed room, they could see Dr. Vera and a mixed team of human and Tarkalian scientists working feverishly. Their voices were muffled, but Stephen could make out phrases like unprecedented adaptation and accelerated evolution. As hours turned into days, Stephen and Cleo found their bond deepening even further. They discovered they could communicate without words, sharing thoughts and feelings through a newfound telepathic connection. Dr. Vera's face appeared on a view screen, her eyes wide with excitement. "What we're seeing is extraordinary," she explained. "The virus has unlocked new potential in your hybrid DNA. We believe this could lead to even greater advancements for both our species." As they absorbed this information, Stephen and Cleo exchanged a look of shared understanding. They were no longer just participants in an experiment. They had become the vanguard of a new era in human-Tarkalian relations. Outside their quarantine, they could sense the shifting tides of public opinion. The attack by the genetic purist had backfired spectacularly, galvanizing support for the breeding program among both humans and Tarkalians. As their conditions stabilized and the danger passed, Stephen and Cleo prepared to face a new reality. They were no longer just two individuals caught up in a groundbreaking experiment. They had become symbols of a shared future, their very existence challenging long-held notions of species identity and separation. The view screen flickered to life once more, revealing the faces of the Tarkalian High Council and Earth's representatives. The two groups, once separated by vast differences, now looked upon Stephen and Cleo with shared wonder and hope. "We stand at the threshold of a new era," the Tarkalian High Counselor announced, his voice filled with gravitas. "The success of this program has opened doors we never thought possible." The Earth Ambassador nodded in agreement. "We propose an expansion of the breeding program," she said, her eyes glinting with excitement. "Research centers on Earth and other human worlds, working towards a future where our species evolve together." As the implications of this proposal sank in, Stephen and Cleo shared a moment of silent communication. They could sense the weight of responsibility settling on their shoulders, along with the exhilarating potential of what lay ahead. Their journey was nowhere near the end. In fact, it seemed that it had only just begun. As they gazed at each other, a sense of purpose and anticipation filled the air. The days that followed saw the Hybrid Integration Research Center transform into a bustling hub of scientific activity. New research teams arrived daily from Earth and various Tarkalian colonies, all eager to study the ongoing genetic evolution of Cleo and Stephen. Dr. Vera's excitement was palpable as she briefed the couple on the next phase of their journey. "We're initiating a series of controlled breeding experiments," she explained, her eyes gleaming with scientific curiosity. "Our goal is to determine if your hybrid genetics can be passed on to offspring." Stephen felt a mix of emotions wash over him. "You mean we might be able to have children?" Cleo's skin rippled with a kaleidoscope of colors, reflecting her own complex feelings. "Is it safe?" she asked, her voice tinged with both hope and apprehension. Dr. Vera nodded reassuringly. "We've taken every precaution. Your safety remains our top priority." As the experiments progressed, Stephen and Cleo discovered their bodies continuing to change in unexpected ways. Their telepathic connection, once a faint whisper, now roared to life with startling clarity. During one particularly intense session, Stephen found himself overwhelmed by a flood of sensations that weren't his own. He gasped, realizing he was experiencing Cleo's physical responses as if they were his own. "It's remarkable," Dr. Vera murmured, her eyes fixed on the monitors displaying their synchronized physiological readings. "Your bodies are instinctively optimizing for genetic transfer. This level of compatibility is unprecedented." Weeks turned into months and the HIRC buzzed with anticipation. Then, on a quiet afternoon, alarms blared through the facility. Stephen and Cleo were rushed to the medical wing, their hearts racing in unison. Dr. Vera burst into the room, her face flushed with excitement. "It worked," she announced breathlessly. "We've confirmed successful fertilization. Cleo, you're pregnant." The news spread like wildfire, igniting a firestorm of reactions across both human and Tarkalian societies. Supporters hailed it as a breakthrough that could solve the Tarkalian fertility crisis, while others voiced concerns about genetic purity. As Cleo's pregnancy progressed, her body adapted in fascinating ways. Her skin developed a protective layer that shifted colors to regulate temperature, while her internal organs rearranged to accommodate the growing hybrid fetus. Stephen, linked to Cleo through their telepathic bond, experienced every moment alongside her. His body produced unique hormones that complemented her pregnancy, a phenomenon that left the research team in awe. "It's as if your bodies are working in perfect harmony," Dr. Vera marveled as she reviewed their latest test results. "The fetus shows remarkable genetic stability. We may have overcome the issues that plagued previous Tarkalian reproduction attempts." Security Chief Krell took the news of Cleo's pregnancy as a call to action. He implemented a series of enhanced security measures around the HIRC, his team working tirelessly to create an impenetrable protective bubble around the facility. "We've installed quantum-entangled sensors throughout the perimeter," Krell explained during a briefing. "They'll detect even the slightest hint of genetic purist activity." As Cleo's due date approached, the anticipation within the HIRC reached a fever pitch. Dr. Vera and her team worked around the clock, fine-tuning a specialized delivery room designed to adapt to any unforeseen hybrid physiological needs. The Tarkalian High Council declared the unborn child a symbol of hope for their species, organizing planet-wide celebrations and educational programs. Meanwhile, Earth's government proposed a formal alliance centered around the joint breeding program, sparking intense diplomatic negotiations. Media outlets from across the galaxy descended upon the Tarkalian homeworld, their transmissions beaming updates to billions of eager viewers. Krell's security team worked overtime, managing the influx of reporters and curious onlookers who gathered outside the HIRC's gates. Then, in the early hours of a crisp Tarkalian morning, Cleo's labor began. Her hybrid physiology responded in ways that astonished even the most experienced medical professionals. Contractions rippled across her body in mesmerizing patterns, her skin pulsing with waves of bioluminescence. Stephen, linked to her through their telepathic bond, felt every sensation as if it were his own. He gripped Cleo's hand, their minds merging in a shared experience of pain and exhilaration. Dr. Vera's voice cut through the haze of their shared consciousness. "The baby's crowning," she announced, her tone a mixture of professional calm and terrifying excitement. "Cleo, Stephen, you're about to become parents." As the final stages of labor intensified, the air in the delivery room crackled with anticipation. Human and Tarkalian medical experts stood ready, their eyes fixed on the miraculous event unfolding before them. With a final push from Cleo and a shared surge of effort through their telepathic link, the room filled with the sound of a newborn's cry, a sound that held within it the promise of a new era for both species. Dr. Vera cradled the hybrid child, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's a perfect blend," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Human and Tarkalian traits in perfect harmony." As the medical team bustled around them, Stephen and Cleo shared a moment of profound connection. Their eyes met, and without words they understood the magnitude of what they had accomplished. The birth of their child marked not just the culmination of their personal journey, but the beginning of a new chapter in human Tarkalian relations. As news of the successful delivery spread beyond the walls of the HIRC, reactions poured in from across the galaxy. The Tarkalian High Council convened an emergency session, while Earth's government scrambled to address the implications of this unprecedented event. In the corridors of power throughout the galaxy, discussions of alliances and rivalries took on new urgency. But within the quiet sanctuary of their recovery room, Stephen and Cleo remained focused on the miracle they had created. As they gazed at their newborn child, they knew that their journey was just getting started. The true test of their hybrid legacy was just beginning, and the galaxy watched with anxious anticipation to see what the future would hold. The air in the delivery room crackled with anticipation as Cleo's labor intensified. Dr. Vera and her team of human and Tarkalian medical experts moved with practiced efficiency, their eyes fixed on the monitors displaying Cleo's vital signs. Stephen stood by Cleo's side, his hand clasped tightly in hers, their telepathic bond pulsing with shared dedication and excitement. As another contraction gripped Cleo's body, Her skin rippled with waves of bioluminescence. Stephen felt the sensation echo through his own body, their shared experience intensifying with each passing moment. Dr. Vera's voice cut through the haze of their linked consciousness. "The baby's heart rate is strong and steady," she announced, her tone a mixture of professional calm and scarcely controlled excitement. "Cleo, you're progressing faster than we anticipated. Your hybrid physiology seems perfectly adapted for this." Cleo's eyes locked with Stephen's, a wordless exchange passing between them. He nodded, channeling his strength to her through their unique connection. The medical team watched in awe as Cleo's body seemed to glow from within, her Tarkalian biology working in perfect harmony with her human traits. "I can feel it," Cleo gasped, her voice tight with exertion. "The baby. It's time." Dr. Vera positioned herself at the foot of the bed, her experienced hands ready. "All right, Cleo. On the next contraction, I need you to push." The room fell silent, save for the steady beep of medical equipment. Then, with a surge of effort that resonated through both Cleo and Stephen, she pushed. The telepathic link between them flared, their combined strength flowing into the monumental task at hand. "That's it! Keep going!" Dr. Vera encouraged, her eyes widening as she saw the first signs of the baby emerging. "The head is crowning. One more big push, Cleo." With a final, Herculean effort, Cleo bore down. Stephen felt as if he were pushing alongside her, their minds and bodies working as one. Suddenly, the room filled with a new sound, the strong, clear cry of a newborn. "It's a girl!" Dr. Vera exclaimed, quickly wrapping the infant in a soft blanket. "And she's perfect." As the medical team bustled around them, performing routine checks and measurements, Stephen and Cleo shared a moment of profound connection. Their eyes met, and without words, they understood the magnitude of what they had accomplished. Dr. Vera gently placed the newborn on Cleo's chest. "Here she is," she said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "The first human Tarkalian hybrid child." Stephen leaned in close, his heart swelling with emotion as he took in the sight of his daughter for the first time. Her skin shimmered with an iridescent quality, shifting between human and Tarkalian hues. Her eyes, larger than a human's, but with the depth and complexity of Tarkalian vision, opened wide, taking in her new surroundings with remarkable alertness. As Stephen reached out to touch her tiny hand, an unexpected surge of telepathic energy flowed between the three of them. The connection, once shared only between Cleo and Stephen, now expanded to include their newborn daughter. In that moment, they experienced a profound sense of unity and love that transcended the boundaries of their different species. "She's beautiful," Stephen whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "What should we name her?" Cleo's skin rippled with a kaleidoscope of colors, reflecting the joy and love she felt. "Nova," she said softly, to symbolize the new dawn she represents. As if in response to her name, Nova let out a small coo, her iridescent skin glowing softly. Dr. Vera, who had been examining the child closely, looked up with excitement in her eyes. "Her vitals are incredibly strong," she reported. "And look at these." She gently turned Nova, revealing small, delicate protrusions along her spine. "These could indicate enhanced sensory abilities. We'll need to run more tests, but I've never seen anything like this before." News of Nova's birth spread rapidly through the HIRC. Within minutes, the facility was abuzz with excitement. Scientists, researchers, and support staff gathered outside the medical wing, their faces beaming with pride and wonder at what they had collectively achieved. In the following hours, as Cleo rested and Stephen kept a watchful eye on their newborn daughter, Dr. Vera and her team conducted thorough examinations of Nova. Each test revealed new marvels about the hybrid child's unique physiology. "Her immune system is extraordinary," Dr. Vera explained, showing Stephen and Cleo a holographic display of Nova's cellular structure. "It's as if she's combined the best defenses of both human and Tarkalian biology. This could have incredible implications for medical treatments for both our species." As the first day of Nova's life drew to a close, the implications of her birth were already rippling across the galaxy. The Tarkalian High Council convened an emergency session to discuss the successful hybrid birth, while Earth's government scrambled to address the legal and societal implications of this unprecedented event. Stephen and Cleo, however, remained focused on the miracle they had created. As they gazed at Nova, sleeping peacefully in a specially designed crib that adapted to her unique physiological needs, they knew that their journey was just the beginning. The true test of their hybrid legacy was just beginning, and the galaxy watched with suspenseful pause to see what the future would hold for this remarkable family.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.